Now, Israel's new ruling coalition has been in power for now just under a week after the ousting of the country's longest-serving leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, and he came out of office on Sunday. Now, the coalition of rival parties from across the political spectrum won a confidence vote in parliament with a razor-thin majority. This has led to belief that the coalition may find it difficult to last or may not even be able to produce a significant change of course on the biggest issues facing the country. Well, to give us a sense of what might lie ahead for the new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, and the coalition that he'll be leading for at least 2 years, I spoke to member of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, Ruth Wasserman Lande. She represents the Blue and White Party, one of the coalition partners. As a member of the Knesset and now a member of the ruling coalition, there are so many people outside of your coalition that are not giving you much of a chance of it surviving. What do you know that they don't know?
Well, first of all, we don't pretend to know everything. I think he who does is rather presumptuous, particularly in our very complex neighborhood. Nonetheless, the current Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, has said in his opening speech, inaugural speech, that he will be the Prime Minister of the entire country. There's not going to be any kind of premiership or leadership that is only concerning a certain segment of society, none of that at all, and that's not the point. The point is precisely the contrary, bringing people together, making the dichotomy less painful, and really healing Israeli society into more understanding, more cooperation. And I think that the coalition currently is very expressive of that. We have so many different parties within it. Actually, it's quite a first in Israeli politics that right-wing parties, left-wing parties, even the Arab Islamist Party, as well as the central parties, such as Blue and White, in which I am a member as well, actually form a coalition together, cooperate, and really participate in the same government, wanting the best for society as a whole.
Many people believe that this was really more about getting rid of Netanyahu, build as a coalition for change, and as you say, wanting to do things differently. The diversity, might that not be the problem though? Because your ideologies are so diverse that how will you agree to deal with some of the big issues like the Palestinian-Israeli peace process?
So several things. First of all, the driving force behind, I think, quite a number of the recent elections, because we did seem to have rather a few, was driving former Prime Minister Netanyahu out. That's correct. So that was the glue which originally brought very, very different parties together, which probably would never have come together in the first place. However, we feel strongly, both the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Minister of Defense, who are the three most important, I would say, leading figures in the government, that healing and cooperation is really needed. That is something, to our feeling, that former Prime Minister Netanyahu did much to break down. And that's why, in a kind of ironic manner, he managed by this policy to actually bring all those differing parties, which would never have otherwise, exactly as you said, sit together, actually come together. So in a sense, he actually did something good without meaning to do it. Will it work? Peter, that's something we'll have to wait and see. I know that there's a lot of goodwill. There's a lot of earnest and sincere wish to really make it work. It's not going to be easy. There are differing ideologies and differing ideas concerning a myriad of issues, not only the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And yet I hope and I pray that at least several operative, much needed steps, for example, such as the budget, the national budget, which has not been voted for the past 2.5 years. This country has been going from day to day without a national budget, will be agreed upon and will be executed. And that is already something to write home about. So we need to take a day at a time. Yes, plan strategically, understanding that there are inherent challenges.
The first test already came, didn't it? The Hamas sending incendiary balloons, but they felt provoked because your coalition allowed those demonstrations to take place in Jerusalem. They had been banned before, and yet they were allowed to carry on. Did all the members of the coalition allow those demonstrations? Because a lot of things get said that are quite provocative in those kinds of environments.
Okay, so thank you for asking that, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding regarding that particular demonstration. First, I'd like to say that it's not a demonstration. It's actually a celebration of the Day of Jerusalem, which was postponed because at the time of the actual reunification of Jerusalem, which is celebrated annually with flags and so on, we had a war going on, and therefore this was postponed. There was a lot of discussion amidst the leading figures in the police force and the security forces and the government, whether to create an opportunity for these people to celebrate or not. And the police warned that there may be a problem to secure the celebrators because this may provoke Hamas. But this was not a demonstration. This was a celebration of the reunification of Jerusalem and flag waving, etc. Let me just add to that, in that celebration, things were being said by some of the people who were celebrating that are absolutely, undeniably, without any question, unacceptable. They do not represent me or the majority of the Israeli people. They are disgusting and they should not be said. And many leaders have said such very clear messages afterwards, denouncing absolutely, unbelievably unacceptable statements that are completely not part of the democracy that I see myself as part of. Having said that, the Hamas seeing itself needing to send, we call it incendiary balloons, which, I mean, quite honestly, I don't know who understands this word. It's just to make it very clear, balloons that create huge fires that destroy agricultural land and work by farmers and civilians that have really and truly absolutely nothing to do with anything that is happening on the southern border of Israel. Civilians, women, children, farmers that are living in the villages surrounding those areas. And these balloons are very often being sent as a kind of like a trigger to irritate, to keep the security forces in Israel busy and so on. I completely denounce the use of these balloons exactly in the same manner that I denounce using rockets. This is completely wrong, not to be done vis-a-vis civilian population, and that does not excuse and or permit in any way to allow the statements, not violent actions, yet statements that are completely unacceptable, some of which were said by those celebrators in Jerusalem. And by the way, my denouncement has been officially made by all the leaders of the coalition.
Are you fearful that there could be an escalation of tit-for-tat attacks between the Israeli authorities and Hamas following what's happened this week?
I think that following what happened this week is finished, it's done. The situation has been stabilized. I'd like to remind those who are not exactly on the nitty-gritty of the details that the current Minister of Internal Security is actually a former senior IDF personality who is very high on the Labour Party list. In fact, he's on the left side of the map, very pro, I would say, cooperation with the Palestinians, renewing the negotiations and so on. Yet there cannot be a situation in which Jewish people cannot raise the Israeli flag in the capital of the state of Israel, which is Jerusalem. Again, there's a difference between that and stating some of the things that were stated against Arabs and or Palestinians by some of the participants that are completely unacceptable. If I think that there will be an escalation, I personally feel that it is an interest of Hamas to escalate regardless of this particular celebration. They want the escalation to be focused on Jerusalem rather than on Gaza, because that gains more support in the Islamic world and amidst Palestinians in the West Bank and within Israel as well. But if they have no choice, they'll do it without the provocation in Jerusalem. So first, we should not give them any excuses to provoke, one. But two, given the fact that now there's a policy that does not allow simply bagfuls of cash to be given directly from Qatar, facilitated by Israel, to Hamas leadership, like it happened prior to the change of the government for a number of years, the Hamas is growing restless because they want this money, they need this money, they demand this money, and they got used to receiving this money, not in the form of services and help to the people, but in bagfuls of cash, which is incomprehensible to somebody like me. And once they understand that they're not getting that, they will seek to escalate the situation, whether we give them the provocation or not.
Let's go back to the coalition a little bit and help us understand this 2-year premiership, and then you swap leaders. How was that negotiated? And some people are saying, of all the people in the grouping, they didn't see Naftali Bennett coming forward as the first prime minister of this coalition.
So, of course, it always depends whom you ask, Peter, because the negotiation of such a coalition is a tremendously complex issue having to do with much politics and I would say a fair amount of ego as well, as always in politics. I think the fact that we have Naftali Bennett being first as a kind of a calming factor for the right-wing parties in the coalition, despite the relatively small number of seats that Naftali Bennett's party, Yamina, gained, which is 6, and 1 left, leaving him with 5, which is a really unprecedented low number of seats. However, there was an agreement, and that is, I think, the hopeful element in the coalition, that all will be done in complete agreement, meaning that once there is a alternate prime minister, like there was with Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, the leader of my party, Blue and White Party, who's also the Minister of Defense, the idea of that was to be able to be the checks and balances over anything and everything that the Prime Minister, then Netanyahu, currently Naftali Bennett, will want to forward. So there will be no decision made, in fact, which is not also agreed upon and authorized by Yair Lapid, who is the chairman of Yesh Atid and supposedly the prime minister in 2 years' time. So the idea of it was to make sure that there are checks and balances and that there is as true a representation as possible of all the various ideas within this coalition.
What about Mansour Abbas and his Ram party? A lot of people are saying that he's just there to make up the numbers. Does he have a genuine voice, and is his opinion genuinely listened to?
Thank you very, very, very much for this question, because much more than politics, I think, as you know already, Peter, from our several conversations, my favorite topic in the world is Arab affairs. So you've asked exactly the specific issue which actually everybody wants to hear, and I would love to answer. The Ra'am party is an Islamic party, an Islamic movement party. So ironically, it would almost seem crazy that a coalition in Israel, a governing coalition, that for years and years has not had the agreement of the United Arab List, the MKs, the members of Knesset who represent the Arab voter in Israel. They were not prepared to enter any coalition because for them it's like a legitimization. Despite the fact that there are MKs in the Israeli parliament, they would not enter any coalition and government for years as a kind of a statement that specifically the Islamic Movement Party was willing to do that, by the way, in complete opposition to the United List. They are angry with him. Now, what does that mean? It's not only about the numbers, it's also about the numbers. Without the numbers of Ra'am, that's 4 seats, the coalition could not have been formed. Yet, is his voice listened to? Oh, yes, absolutely, and without a doubt, yes. For the first time ever, Peter, there will be 2 committees in the Israeli parliament headed by Ra'am representatives. Important committees. One of them is the Internal Affairs Committee, dealing with many important issues. The other dealing with a huge problem in the Arab sector, and that is the crime and violence within specifically the Arab sector, which the Arab parties wanted to deal with, needed to deal with, and hopefully now will deal with. Do those committees have teeth? Definitely yes, particularly the internal affairs one. So certainly, the answer is absolutely yes.